Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be inspecting the rod bearings on my E90 BMW. Guys, before I start this video, I want to talk about the new camera lens that I'm using now. It takes in more light, so it'll give you a softer, better quality image. It looks a little more dramatic, but that should help focus in on what we want to talk about at any given time during a repair. I want to put the focus where I'm actually paying attention. For instance, here now, I want to draw your eyes to the timing chain tensioner. That should look super clear and well lit, even though I don't have super great lighting. So what I'm trying to do here is use softer lighting and focus in on the content a little bit better and give you some more dramatic shots. Let me know what you guys think. All right, to give you an idea, that's a pretty nice looking shot of the headlight. It's pretty dramatic. We have the background being out of focus, and we have focus in on what we want to talk about. I'm hoping that looks super detailed for you guys and you guys prefer it. Let's see how this goes. I figured out that my timing chain guides went bad. I talked about that in the last video. What I'm going to do now is take this locking tool off so we can take out the rod bearings and see is this motor even worth saving or not before we go too far into this. If we determine before I change all the timing gears that the rods look rough, maybe we can talk about plan B. But for now, what I'm going to do is remove this cam lock tool. It's not needed because I still have my main timing chain connected. Now let's go under the car. So I wasn't feeling that lens. I've changed to a different lens now. Let's go under the car. For anyone interested, this is an f1.4 lens, 24mm. So I'm hoping you guys can see a difference in the quality there. I'm going to insert a punch. Let's select the oil pump. This is a T45 Torx. There's the gear itself. Mine looks good. There's no fractures or anything. Removing these two E10 Torx. They're very loose, barely tight. Just an observation. That shouldn't be that loose already, but what I noticed is one of the bolts up there that holds this plate was nearly all the way backed out, just with vibration. So I'm going to put some blue Loctite when I reinsert these, even though they're aluminum and that's kind of risky. So I want to have it that this is more securely connected. Probably just reach in here. This is a bolt that was backed out quite a bit from vibration. Maybe when the chain tensioner failed, it just worked itself loose. But that's not very encouraging to see. There's no Loctite on these, so I may put some blue Loctite after, just to ensure that they can't back out. There's 3 screws for the oil pickup. They are E10s. There's the oil pickup. Now I'm removing these bolts to go to the windage tray. Now we can see the bottom end. Switching back to E12 for the oil pump bolts. These aren't super tight for what it's worth. You're looking at cylinder 1 at bottom dead center, and we have the writing here, F5, facing this way. So in terms of orientation on cylinder 1, it says F5 on there, meaning we want to make sure that F5 is facing this way and not this way after. This is an E12. There's the upper. Popped it out with a trim tool so that I don't mar up the crank by accident. You gotta push the piston up a little bit to get clearance to get that bearing out, or you can try to roll it all the way around to the other side. But when they say that the bearing spins, just as an FYI, what that means is it's normally in this position and it stays there. But if it spins, it'll actually rotate a little bit and then get beat up and thinned out and then clog up your oil supply from the crankshaft. As you can see, there's a tang there. The bottom cap will have a tang as well. On the other side, they always match up tang for tang in terms of how to orient the cap. Cylinder 6 is already at BDC, so I'm going to take it off next. As you can see, the tang matches the tang. That's the most elegant way to do it, but I had to kind of give priority to the camera for a better view, so I can't stand there. I'm kind of doing it by feel. But if you're gonna try to knock a bearing out, use a plastic trim tool. I'm gonna go up to the next cylinder now. Since I have the pistons pushed up and out of the way, I should be able to rotate the crankshaft enough that I can get to the bolts and not have the crankshaft touch the piston as it's sitting up in the bore. And I should be able to get all the remaining rod bearings out. Let's try that. So I definitely didn't want to speak too soon, because you can get all happy thinking everything's fine and then you find you have one bad bearing. I don't think I'm going to. This looks all pretty good, but don't talk until you get to the last one. If this one's good, then we can breathe a sigh of relief. Looks okay. It's funny because it's the worst one, but it looks okay. So from what I understand, number 4 has the hardest life. It's more likely to spin on these cars. But the surface feels good. Crankshaft feels solid. There's nothing discernible on the crankshaft surface. So that's good news. But that bearing is the most beat up of all of them. There's cylinder 1 upper, cylinder 1 lower. That's how the cap looks. Cylinder 2 upper, cylinder 2 lower. The cap. They're all similar looking, so I'll just show you the bearings from here on. Cylinder 3 upper, cylinder 3 lower. This one looks a little more beat up, but there's no copper showing. 200,000 miles, I'd say that's not terrible. This should technically be the worst looking bearing. Cylinder 4 upper. The N54s tend to spin number 4, and they're usually in the roughest shape just by design. Maybe the hottest cylinder, or just in general the design of the motor causes number 4 to get beat up. So that's not pretty, but it's not terrible. There's no copper showing. Probably still would have lasted, but you know, It's had a rough life, and I don't think this damage is. I don't think this is due to low oil pressure or anything like that. It's just with age and time. If you dig your fingernail across it, you don't really feel anything. It's still pretty smooth. That should be the worst looking bearing. The uppers tend to get beat up more. Cylinder 4 lower. Still not looking pretty, but not horrible. That's how the cap looks on number 4. Just since it was the roughest bearing, I figured I'd show you. Cylinder 5 upper. Cylinder 5 lower. Cylinder 6 upper. Cylinder 6 lower. There's a groove on a couple of these that you can kind of dig your fingernail into, just barely. It kind of catches, but the crank looks perfectly fine. I think I found that on cylinder 1 and 6. If you look closely on cylinder 1, this one you can actually feel pretty decently, actually. And I've seen some threads with high mileage N54s and people talking about the condition of their rod bearings. I don't think any of this damage you're seeing here is due to the few seconds of low oil pressure that I had. I think it's just with age, and that's probably what you would see on your N54 after 150,000 miles, depending on how hard it's been run. Some grooves. So at 200,000 miles, should you touch your rod bearings or just leave well enough alone? That's a really tough one for me to say. I'm already in there now because I'm trying to ensure that my motor survives after having my crank sprocket get all chewed up and my timing chain fail. But at the same time, you may not necessarily have to get in there. If you're gonna bother, then sure. So yeah, you may expect to see some grooving and whatnot, but they don't look horrible. You don't see copper showing, and they don't look that terrible for 200,000 miles. So could you get away and just kind of run it to 250K and just wait for it to blow up? Sure. Would changing these out buy you a whole lot more time? Yeah, potentially. So that's going to conclude this video, part 3 of my timing chain, oil pump gasket, and rod bearing DIY for the N54. In the next video, we will plastic gauge the new bearings on the crankshaft, install them, and then we'll move on to installing the new timing hardware. If this is the first video you're catching of mine, please consider subscribing. I do upload regularly. Thanks for watching.